Hello YouTube world, Pretend Farmer here. Not a real farmer, just pretending. I did a video back in the spring about spring chickens and how to prepare for your flock for the summertime weather that was coming up. Now that we're getting into fall, Pretend Farmer has decided to do a fall chickens video. Preparations that you need to start taking now for winter. While winter's not here yet, there's already changes that are starting to take place with chickens going into fall. I'm noticing some of these things right now on the Pretend farm. You know, one of the big things that changes with chickens when the weather starts getting cooler is their diet. During wintertime, a chicken is going to eat about 1.5 times more food than what they'd eat in the summer. And especially if you're used to free-ranging your chickens, where they're out eating bugs and grass all day, you're going to notice as that grass starts to kind of die and stop growing and the bugs go away, your chickens are going to be consuming a lot more feed. You're going to want to keep an eye on your feeder because they're going to be depleting it a whole lot faster in the winter months than they did back in the summer. Another thing we like to do here on the Pretend farm is feeding cracked corn. Probably here in about the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to start getting cracked corn when I go buy my layer pellets and mixing corn in with their feed. Now you only want to do this about a 10% ratio. Their primary diet still needs to be their layer pellets, but 10% of it, roughly, can be cracked corn. Now the cracked corn is going to actually do a couple different things. Primarily, cracked corn is loaded with carbohydrates, which cause the chicken's digestive system to take longer to process it. During this digestion period, that actually helps generate heat for the chicken to stay warm during the really cold winter months. Another thing I really like about cracked corn is it makes the yolks on your eggs extra hearty. After feeding your chickens cracked corn for just probably a week or so, you'll start to notice the yolks on your egg turning to like a darker, deeper orangish color. And they'll be really firm. You can press on them with a fork and they'll just kind of push back at you. You're going to have way better quality eggs supplementing a little bit of cracked corn into your chicken's diet. And you can't do this so much during the summertime, or at least you shouldn't, just because they don't need that cracked corn in the summer. It can actually cause them to overheat and be dehydrated. Since chickens cut back their laying in the wintertime anyway, they really don't need the layer feed as much during that time of year as they do in the summer months. So why not just supplement a little bit of corn in, save yourself some costs there. And aside from mixing cracked corn in with your feed, you can also use it just as a snack. They love it. Pour a little pile out on the ground and let your chickens peck at it before bedtime. It's also great incentive if you're trying to get your chickens to go back in the pen. You need to go somewhere. They'll follow you right back in for a handful of cracked corn. Miss Molly likes cracked corn. Now another thing you're going to notice going into fall is the molt. I don't know if you can see Miss Molly's back here. She's missing a lot of feathers. Miss Molly's always had a problem with feathers because she's well liked by the roosters and they rub them off of her. But a lot of my chickens are starting to look a little shabby right now, and what's going on is they're starting to molt. Chickens generally molt in the spring and in the fall, and what they do is they basically start shedding their old feathers and growing in fresh new plumage for the next season. And we've talked about this before, about how chickens' feathers are always exposed to the sun's rays, to the wind, to the weather, all the elements. They get kind of frail and damaged over the course of several months, and they need to regenerate new feathers. So chickens will generally molt spring and fall. In the fall, I believe they get a little bit fluffier feathers, kind of sort of like a winter coat. In the spring, it seems to be lighter. That might just be in my head, but I do know they generally molt in these 2 seasons. Generally, when your chickens molt, you'll see feathers floating around your yard everywhere. They'll look really shabby. They'll have bald spots. They generally kind of gradually push new feathers in behind the old ones that are falling out. Sometimes it's barely even noticeable. It can be really subtle. Sometimes it's pretty drastic. It all just kind of depends on the breeds of chickens you have and the elements. I don't know exactly what causes some to be real aggressive molts, others to be barely noticeable. I'm not really sure. I can't find anything solid on that. I can tell you that a lot of times chickens, if you raise up chicks from pullet stage on up into fall, they probably aren't going to molt their first season. I never saw it with any of mine. They'll skip that year since they still have new feathers anyway. They'll molt the next go around. So we've talked about dietary changes and we've talked about molting. What else do you need to know for fall? Well, keep in mind that predators are going to be a little bit more aggressive in pursuing your chickens during the colder winter months. They don't have as many options. There's not as many things running around as in the spring or the warmer summer months. So your chickens are going to be more of a bullseye or more of a target for things like hawks, foxes, raccoons. They're going to be a little bit more vulnerable to predation. Chickens really are quite defenseless creatures. You need to make sure that your security on your coop is beefed up. Make sure you're closing the doors at night to your run. Make sure you're shutting and locking them in the coop. Make sure you don't have any holes or anything dug under your fences where things can squeeze in, because they're going to be trying a little bit harder now. Make sure you have netting up to protect from hawks overhead. Just these simple little things. And if you're going to free range your birds, make sure they have cover that they can run under just to be safe, because they're going to need that in the case of a hawk attack or that they need to get away from something. Ultimately, as always, there's no guarantee that your chickens will be safe if you're free ranging them. It's just a chance you kind of have to take. And we've talked in other videos about how to minimize the risk to that, but there's always going to be that little bit of risk. You know, a lot of times in the fall, we'll let the chickens go in the garden and kind of finish it off. They'll clean up a lot of the plants and the peppers and the stuff that they like to eat that's kind of not really worth picking and eating for us, but yet they can enjoy that. And another great fall treat is pumpkins for chickens. They really love pumpkins. Once you get on further into fall and Halloween is over, people are practically giving pumpkins away. Just as usual, make sure that they're not rotten or moldy when you feed them to your chickens. It's okay if they're a little soft, but they can't be disgusting. If they would make you sick, they'll probably make your chickens sick as well. You know, one of the nice things about cooler weather is you don't have to be so quick to pick your eggs out of the nest boxes. There's not as much risk of them spoiling in the cooler temperatures. And a lot of people say, well, pretend farmer, can I just collect my eggs every other day if the temperature's in the 50s or 60s? Well, you probably should get them out if you can, just because you're either going to have a hen that you didn't really want to go broody, that's going to see those eggs and decide she wants to set on them, which can kind of be a pain in the butt going into fall. Or you're going to have chickens see those eggs and it's going to be more opportunity for them to get in the habit of pecking those eggs. And once you get chickens that start eating their eggs, you got a real headache. It's almost an impossible habit to break. So I would still encourage you to get your eggs out of the nest box daily, but if you forget or you don't get to them in a day or so, it's not like 100-degree temperatures where those eggs might possibly spoil or be bad by the time you get to them. They'll generally save better in the cold. Heat and warm temperature always accelerates bacterial growth and that kind of stuff. Cooler temperatures, you're much, much safer. Now, a really common myth with chickens is that it's not as important to give them water in the winter time as it is in the hot summer months. People think that the chickens, like people, get thirstier in hot weather. They need more access to water in the summer, but it's not a big deal in the winter. That's not true. Chickens do get thirsty and like to drink in the summer, but it's equally as important for a chicken to have water in the wintertime as it is in the summer. In fact, they're relying on that water to help them lay eggs, especially as the weather gets colder outside and their water might potentially start to freeze. You need to make sure you either have a way to thaw it or replenish it so that they have constant access to that water throughout the day. If they don't, it might not necessarily be a life or death thing, but it's going to hurt you in your egg production. They don't just need layer feed to produce an egg, they also need the proper amount of water. And in fact, just going one day without water is enough to throw off a hen's egg laying cycle. Now, going into cooler weather, you might be tempted to seal up their coop a little bit better from drafts and from letting the cold air in. And that's okay. You want to do that when it gets really cold out. But do not shut off the ventilation in your coop completely. Even in colder weather, chickens still need ventilation in their coop for their respiratory health. Also, if you have a coop that's sealed up too tight in the wintertime, when it gets cold, their breath will actually condensate and collect on their combs and wattles. Well, then when the air hits them, they're going to be more susceptible to frostbite. And so therefore, you're actually better off to ventilate your coop and have a little bit of draft going through it, even in the cold, so that they're less likely to have that happen. their breath isn't going to create all that condensation and steam up as bad if there's a little bit of a draft going through. That only happens when you seal them up tight. So be sure and leave your coop ventilated. We're going to probably seal off the bottom third here of this, just because they roost right here on these bars. They don't need all that ventilation, and if it's real windy blowing through here, that can kind of affect them. They can get down lower and get away from it. But I think for their comfort, so that they can just stay on the same roost bar that they always use, I do try and restrict it some. I'm still going to leave the top probably third or 2/3 even open, just because it's good for them. You know, one of the nice things I like about fall and winter is you don't have to clean out your chicken coop as often as you do in the hot summer months. Kind of like I said with the eggs spoiling faster in warmer weather. The cold, you don't have the maggots and all the disgusting smells and the bacterial growths that form quite as quickly in their droppings as when you do in the summertime. So generally, going into winter, we scale back from cleaning the coop about once a week to probably every other week. Naturally, this is going to vary depending on how many chickens you have and what size your coop is. It could be different for everybody. But regardless, you shouldn't have to clean your coop as often in the cold winter months as you do during the hot summer months. But on that note, keep in mind that you're going to have mice. If you've got field mice or something like that around, they're going to be looking for a warm place to shack up for winter. So do make sure that you're cleaning your coop out good enough that you know mice aren't in there running around. The mouse droppings create a very unsanitary environment for chickens, and actually mice will nibble on chickens' toes while they're up on the roost, or especially if the chickens sleep on the ground. The chickens don't really pay attention to what's going on at night. They go into almost like a comatose type state when they're roosting, and they'll wake up, their toes will be all messed up because they've had mice nibbling on them. All right, you don't like being held, do you? I need another chicken. You know, this is our one and only Rhode Island Red, and she's very difficult to catch. I haven't managed to win over her affection yet. It's truly a special moment that we can share here on the pretend farm, that we were able to catch and cuddle with our Rhode Island Red chicken. Well, that's all the pretend farmer really knows to say about fall chickens. Do all these things that I've showed you in this video to make sure that your chickens stay comfortable and happy this winter, and you'll do just fine. As always, if you have any questions or you're new to chickens and you want to see a video, feel free to make a request or I'll answer your question in the comments. Until next time, this is the Pretend Farmer signing out. You know, it's truly special when you live on a farm and you don't even have goats, but yet they show up anyway. This is great. Come here. Here, goats. Okay, well, it turns out they're not quite as affectionate as the pigs. Come on. Come here, piggies. Yeah. Oh, yes. I love it. I love it. You know, goats aren't very affectionate, but pigs sure are.